3 days before my son's retirement party, I walked into Hargrove's Bakery on Elm Street to pick up the celebration cake I'd ordered 6 weeks earlier. Lemon pound cake with buttercream roses. Arthur had always loved lemon. Sandra Hargrove met me at the counter before I even reached the register. She's been baking for this town since before my hair went gray. 68 years old, flour on her apron, and a look on her face I had never seen in 32 years of knowing her. She didn't say hello. She came around the counter, took my elbow, and walked me straight to the back. I thought something was wrong with the cake. She pushed open the door to the kitchen, guided me past the cooling racks and the industrial mixers to a small storage room that smelled like vanilla extract and cardboard. She pulled the door nearly shut, not all the way, and turned off the single overhead light. Sandra. I whispered her name. She put one finger to her lips, and then I heard them. Voices coming through the wall from the private dining room Sandra rented out for small gatherings. My son's voice first. Low and deliberate, the way he gets when he's explaining something to the board at work, and then a woman's voice I recognized immediately. My daughter-in-law, Cassandra, and then a third voice. Measured, calm, expensive sounding. A man I didn't know. I pressed closer to the wall. The man was talking about transfer timelines, about a medical evaluation scheduled for the following Tuesday, about a document that needed my signature at the party, something Arthur would hand me during the toast, folded inside what they'd tell me was a sentimental card. Cassandra said, she'll sign it, she trusts him completely. Arthur said, just make sure Whitfield has the assessment ready before the end of the month. My hands went cold. Sandra found mine in the dark and held on. I stood there in that storage room, in the dark, breathing, flower-scented air, and listened to my son plan how to take everything I had left. I want to stop here for just a moment. Before I go any further, I need you to know something. Some details of this story have been changed to protect privacy, names, specific locations, certain dates, but the heart of it is true. Every word of what I heard through that wall is true. And if you've ever been in a position where the person you trusted most looked you in the eye and made you feel loved while planning to destroy you, then you already know how this felt. Tell me where you're watching from. I find it helps, knowing people are out there. My name is Lorraine. I am 64 years old. I live in Millhaven, Connecticut, in the same colonial house where I raised 2 children, buried a husband, and rebuilt a life from rubble. My husband Walter died in April of 2013. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. He was 61. I was 53, and I felt it like the floor had been taken out from under everything I thought was solid. We had built Callaway Home Services together. Residential remodeling, interior renovation, custom cabinetry. Walter had the vision. I had the numbers. By the time he died, we had 40 employees, 3 project managers, and a reputation that had taken us 20 years to earn. Everyone told me to sell. My accountant, Walter's brother, even my sister called from Phoenix and said, Lorraine, you've done enough. Take the money and rest. I didn't sell. I learned the business from the inside out. I went on job sites. I sat in on every estimate. I fired 2 managers who thought a widow wouldn't notice when numbers didn't add up. By 2016, revenue had climbed back from the dip that came with grief. By 2019, we'd hit $8.4 million annually. I promoted Arthur to Vice President of Operations. He'd been with the company 6 years by then, started as a project coordinator, worked his way up honestly. I was proud of him. Arthur is my son, 38 years old, married to Cassandra for 7 years. They have a daughter named Phoebe, who just turned 4, and who, until very recently, was the best part of my Sundays. I want to say that clearly. So you understand what was at stake for me. Not just money, not just the business Walter and I bled for. Phoebe. Sunday mornings, pancakes and cartoons, and a 4-year-old who called me Grammy and meant it like a prayer. The retirement party had been Arthur's idea. I turned 64 in March and had been talking, vaguely, about stepping back. Not fully, but reducing my hours, handing more responsibility to Arthur, maybe traveling a little. He planned an event at the Millhaven Country Club, 80 guests, catered dinner, a slideshow he'd said he was putting together himself. I thought it was love. Sandra Hargrove turned a light back on after the voices faded and the door to the private dining room opened and closed. She sat down on a flour sack and looked at me. "They've been in there twice before," she said. "Last Thursday. And the Thursday before that. Same 3 people, same conversation. A little different each time, more specific." She folded her hands in her lap. "The last time, they mentioned a Dr. Whitfield, said he'd already begun the paperwork. I asked her why she hadn't called me. She looked at the floor. I told myself maybe I was misunderstanding, that it was some kind of legal thing I didn't know about." She looked up. "But I know you, Lorraine. I've known you since Phoebe was born, and you came in here ordering pink sugar cookies every Sunday for 6 months straight." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't let you walk into that party without knowing." I stood up. I smoothed my coat. I asked her for the cake. She blinked. "What?" "The cake. I paid for it. I wanted it." She wrapped it herself, didn't charge me the delivery fee, carried it out to my car. When she closed the trunk, she held onto the handle for a second and said, "Lorraine, what are you going to do?" I told her I didn't know yet. I drove home on the county road the long way, the way that takes you past the reservoir. Walter and I used to drive that road on Sunday evenings when the kids were small, just to have 20 quiet minutes before the week started again. I parked by the water and sat there with the engine off. Whitfield. The name meant nothing to me, but a medical evaluation scheduled for Tuesday 3 days from now meant something. It meant they were moving fast. It meant I had less time than I thought. My phone was in my lap. I scrolled to Arthur's name and stared at it for a long time. Then I put the phone in my purse and started the car. I drove to Millhaven Trust and Savings and sat down with my branch manager, a woman named Harriet who has managed my accounts for 11 years. I told her I needed to understand the exact structure of my assets and who, if anyone, had access to any of it beyond me. She pulled up my file, walked me through everything. Joint accounts I'd forgotten about from when Arthur and I had briefly combined finances during a tax restructuring 3 years ago. A secondary signatory on one of the business accounts, Arthur's name added in 2021, a provision in an outdated power of attorney document I'd signed in 2020 during the early months of COVID, when I'd been worried about what would happen if I got sick. I asked her to freeze everything she could freeze unilaterally while I made calls. She did it without asking questions. That's the thing about people who've watched you for 11 years. They recognize the look. From the parking lot, I called Frances Okafor. Frances is my attorney. She handled Walter's estate, handled the business incorporation, handled every contract dispute we'd had in 20 years. She's 56, sharp as wire, and when I told her what I'd heard through Sandra's wall, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Come to my office," she said, "tonight." I was there by 7. Frances had already pulled the 2020 power of attorney by the time I arrived. She laid it on the desk and showed me the language I hadn't read carefully enough 4 years ago. A healthcare proxy clause buried in Section 3, Paragraph 8. In the event of documented cognitive impairments certified by a licensed physician, Arthur James Calloway would assume full fiduciary authority over all personal and business accounts, with the right to execute sales, transfers, and asset liquidations without further consent. She looked at me over her glasses. "This isn't a retirement plan," she said. "This is a trapdoor." I know. She pulled up her laptop, started typing. "Tell me about this Whitfield." I told her everything I'd heard. The name, the Tuesday timeline, the document they planned to have me sign at the party. Frances worked while I talked, her fingers moving fast, pulling records. By 8:30, she'd found him. Dr. Leonard Whitfield. Geriatric psychiatry, private practice out of Hartford. Board certified, no public disciplinary record. She made a call. A colleague at a Hartford firm who handled medical malpractice called in a favor. By 9:15, she had something. 3 private referrals in the last 4 years, she said quietly, all through the same estate planning attorney. All 3 resulted in competency assessments that found cognitive decline. She looked at the screen. All 3 clients lost financial control within 60 days. 2 were placed in memory care facilities within the year. The third, a woman in Glastonbury, fought back. She paused. Her name is Constance Brewer. She's 72. And she's willing to talk to you. I called Constance that night from Frances's office. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady and clear, and nothing like a woman anyone should have called incompetent. She'd gone through the same thing in 2021. A son-in-law, a doctor who came to her home twice, asked her a series of questions she thought were routine, and filed an assessment 3 weeks later, calling her a risk to her own financial well-being. She'd been saved by her granddaughter, a second-year law student who recognized the language in the paperwork. They pick people who are alone, Constance told me. People who have real assets and no one watching closely enough. I thought about Walter, about how alone I'd been without him, about how natural it had felt to lean on Arthur. I'll testify, Constance said, whatever you need. You call me? I thanked her and meant it all the way down to my bones. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bedroom Walter and I shared for 31 years and stared at the ceiling and let the facts arrange themselves. Arthur had access to one business account. He'd been added in 2021, the same year Cassandra quit her marketing job and the same year they bought a house that, based on the neighborhood, cost considerably more than Arthur's salary should have allowed. I'd thought it was a good investment. I'd thought they were building something. I was wrong about what they were building. My phone buzzed at 6 in the morning. A text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. It was from Frances. New number, she'd said. She'd been calling from her personal line. She'd kept working after I left. The message said, "Found the third party. Call me." I called. His name was Theodore Marsh, a financial consultant out of Stamford, licensed but with 2 FINRA complaints, both settled quietly. He'd been advising Arthur since late 2022. Frances had found wire transfers, 3 of them over the past 18 months, from a holding company called Harlan Group LLC, incorporated in Delaware, to an account she believed was connected to Marsh. "What is Harlan Group?" I asked. Silence for a moment. "That's the part you need to sit down for," she said. Harlan Group LLC had 2 partners, Arthur Callaway and Cassandra Callaway. They'd formed it in November of 2022. The stated business purpose was real estate investment. But the actual transactions Frances had traced through incorporation filings and public records told a different story. Harlan Group had received 3 payments from a commercial buyer, a development company out of New York, totaling $340,000. Payments that corresponded exactly with 3 contracts Callaway Home Services had lost in the same period. Contracts I'd never been able to explain losing. We'd submitted strong bids. We'd had the relationships. The clients had simply gone elsewhere. Arthur had given them a reason to go elsewhere. He'd been selling us out to fund the company he planned to use once I was gone. I stood at my kitchen window holding the phone and looked out at Walter's garden. He'd planted those rose bushes the year Phoebe was born. He'd never met her. He died 8 months before she arrived. I whispered to him the way I sometimes do when no one's around to hear it. "I see it now," I said. "I'm going to fix it." Frances arrived at my house at noon with a colleague, a man named Robert Sims who handled white-collar financial fraud cases. He was calm and organized and took notes on a yellow legal pad, old-fashioned and thorough. By 2 in the afternoon, we had a plan. Robert had already made contact with a retired investigator named Carl Deegan, who Frances had used before. By 6 that evening, Carl had confirmed the Harlan Group transactions and pulled Arthur's personal financial records through channels I didn't ask about. Arthur had a second mortgage on their house, credit card debt, $74,000 spread across 4 cards. The expensive house hadn't been a good investment. It had been a gamble on inheriting mine. The retirement party was Saturday, 2 days away. Frances filed for an emergency injunction Friday morning to freeze the outdated power of attorney before it could be used. A judge in Hartford signed it by afternoon. The document Arthur had been counting on was now legally inert. But I didn't tell Arthur that. I let him believe nothing had changed. Saturday came in, overcast and cool, the way Connecticut Aprils do. I wore the blue dress I bought for Walter's company anniversary dinner back in 2011. It still fit. I don't know why that mattered to me, but it did. Rosa, my housekeeper. She's been with me for 15 years and knows where I keep everything and has seen me at my absolute worst. Braided my hair the way I like it and didn't say a word about the fact that I'd been on the phone since 6 in the morning. She just handed me coffee and said, "You look strong today." I told her she had no idea. The Millhaven Country Club was decorated beautifully, white and gold. A photo display near the entrance with pictures of the company through the years. Walter in a hard hat in 1994, the two of us at a ribbon cutting in 2001, Arthur as a young man on his first job site in 2008. Someone had put real care into it. That almost made it worse. I greeted guests for 45 minutes, shook hands, hugged old clients, smiled at people who had watched me build and grieve and rebuild over 30 years. My accountant, Neil. My senior project manager, James, who'd been with the company 16 years. My sister-in-law, Bonnie, who flew in from Denver and who I'd called Thursday night and who was the only other person in that room who knew what was about to happen. Cassandra hugged me at the entrance, said I looked wonderful, said she was so glad this night was finally here. I hugged her back. Arthur was at the bar with Theodore Marsh. I recognized Marsh from the photo Francis had shown me. Mid-50s, silver hair, the practiced ease of a man who'd spent years making other people comfortable while he picked their pockets. Arthur didn't introduce us. He just smiled and said Marsh was an old colleague, and I nodded and moved on. At 7:30, they called everyone to the tables. Dinner was served. Speeches began. James stood up and talked about the Calloway family work ethic for 4 minutes and made me cry. Actually cry. With something about Walter's handshake being the kind that told you everything about a man's character. My sister-in-law Bonnie pressed my hand under the table. Arthur spoke next. He was good. He is good. I want to say that because it's true and it matters. He is a gifted speaker, warm in a way that reads as genuine even when it isn't. He talked about growing up watching me and Walter, about learning from us, about this company being his inheritance in every sense. Every word was a performance, and I sat there and let him perform. At 8:15, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to give you something tonight. A letter, and something to sign that I think will give you peace of mind as you move into this next chapter." He walked toward me. The room went quiet the way rooms do when they sense a moment coming. I stood up. I took the envelope. I looked at my son. And then I set it on the table without opening it. He blinked. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to say something first." I picked up the microphone from the table. My hands were not shaking. I want you to know that. My hands were completely still. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said. 32 years ago, Walter and I started this company with 1 truck, 2 employees, and a loan we weren't entirely sure we could repay. I paused and let the laughter settle. What we built wasn't just a business. It was a proof of something. That honest work, done honestly for people who trust you, matters. I looked at the table where Neil and James were sitting. "James, you've been with us 16 years. You've run 3 of our most complex projects and never once cut a corner." Neil, 20 years of keeping the numbers true. I looked at them. "I see you." I looked back at the room. This week, I learned something that broke my heart. And I want to be honest with you tonight because the people in this room deserve honesty more than they deserve a performance. The silence shifted. Came heavier. Arthur's face went still. My son asked me here tonight to sign a document. I picked up the envelope and held it in the air. He told me it was peace of mind. It is actually a financial power of attorney structured to transfer full control of Calloway Home Services and all personal accounts to him within 48 hours of a medical assessment he has already arranged with a doctor named Leonard Whitfield, who has done this before. A sound went through the room. Low, collective, stunned. I pressed the button on the small remote in my other hand. The photo display near the entrance changed. The screen now showed a document. Harlan Group LLC, incorporation date. 2 names. Arthur stood up. "Mom, please sit down," I said. I didn't raise my voice. He sat. Harlan Group LLC was formed by my son and his wife in November of 2022. Its purpose, as best we can determine, was to receive payment from a commercial developer in New York in exchange for information, our client relationships, our bidding strategy, our pricing, that allowed that developer's preferred contractor to underbid us on 3 major contracts. I clicked to the next image. Bank statements, 3 transfers, dates and amounts. We lost those contracts. I never knew why. Now I do. I looked at the table where my old clients sat. A man named Douglas Hume, we'd done his commercial remodel in 2019, was looking at Arthur with an expression I recognized, the look of a man doing math. "Douglas," I said quietly, "you left us in January 2023. You said you'd found a more competitive bid." He nodded slowly. "You were given that bid by someone who knew exactly what we'd charge because he helped build our pricing model." I didn't point. "I'm not angry at you. I'm telling you so you understand what happened." Douglas looked at Arthur. His jaw was tight. I continued. "Dr. Leonard Whitfield was scheduled to visit my home on Tuesday for what Arthur told me would be a routine wellness check. What it was actually scheduled to be was a competency evaluation, the same kind he has performed for at least 3 other families in Connecticut, all of which resulted in the target losing financial control." I clicked again. 3 case summaries, no full names. Enough detail to be real. In 2 of those cases, the person was placed in a memory care facility within 12 months. Both have since died. The room had gone completely still. A woman near the back, I didn't know her well, a client's wife, said softly, "Oh my God." I looked at Arthur. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Theodore Marsh, and the look was the look of a man, calculating how fast he could reach an exit. "Theodore Marsh," I said, "is a licensed financial consultant with 2 settled FINRA complaints who has been advising my son since late 2022. He is the architect of the Harlan Group structure." I clicked to his photo on the screen. "He is also, as of this morning, the subject of a formal complaint filed with FINRA and the Connecticut Department of Banking." Marsh stood, moved toward the door. 2 people were already there. Francis had positioned them as guests. They weren't guests. He stopped. I turned back to the room. "I want to tell you about a woman named Constance Brewer. She's 72 years old and she lives in Glastonbury, Connecticut, and she almost lost everything she built because someone she trusted arranged for a doctor to call her incompetent." I paused. "Her granddaughter saved her. Tonight, I'd like you to hear from her." The screen shifted to a video call. Constance was sitting in her kitchen, silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at the camera like she'd been waiting for this moment for 3 years. "My name is Constance Brewer," she said. "In 2021, I was declared cognitively impaired by a doctor I had never met before. He walked into my living room. The assessment took 40 minutes. Within 3 weeks, my son-in-law had transferred $1.2 million out of my accounts. If my granddaughter hadn't caught the paperwork, I would have lost my home, my savings, and my independence." She leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Leonard Whitfield performed my assessment. He was paid $30,000 by my son-in-law's attorney." She looked directly into the camera. "Don't let them do this to you. Fight back. I'm living proof it can be done." The call ended. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Arthur said loudly, "Mom, you don't understand what you're—" "I understand exactly," I said. "I heard you. 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, and last Thursday, in Sandra Hargrove's private dining room, through the wall." He went pale. I picked up the envelope he'd given me and held it over the nearest candle. It was a little theatrical. I'll admit that. Walter would have laughed. I set it down before it caught. Francis had told me not to destroy evidence, but the point was made. The emergency injunction to invalidate the 2020 power of attorney was signed yesterday afternoon by Judge Patricia Allen of the Hartford Superior Court, I said. All personal and business accounts are frozen pending a full forensic audit. Arthur's signatory access to the company account has been suspended as of this morning. I looked at my son. He was standing now, both hands flat on the table. Why? I asked him, not into the microphone? Just to him, quietly, the way you speak to someone you raised. You could have asked me. You could have come to me and said you were struggling. The debt, the house, whatever it was, we could have talked. He didn't answer. Because that's what I would have done for you, I said. I would have helped you. Cassandra was crying. I didn't know what that meant, and I still don't. At 8:50, two officers who had been seated at the back of the room, plain clothes, Francis's arrangement, approached the table where Theodore Marsh was still standing near the blocked door. A third officer walked to Arthur. Theodore Marsh was placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud and elder financial abuse. Arthur was detained for questioning. The forensic audit Francis had requested would determine what charges followed. I stood at the podium and watched them go. And then I looked at the room, at 80 people who had come to celebrate something, and I said, I'm sorry your evening ended this way. The lemon pound cake is from Hargrove's Bakery, and it is excellent. Please eat it. Some people laughed. Some people cried. A few came up and held my hands without saying anything at all, which was the right thing to do. Phoebe was home with a sitter. She didn't know any of this had happened. I thought about her the whole drive home. The weeks that followed were long. The forensic audit confirmed what Francis suspected. Harlan Group had received $340,000 in payments over 18 months. Arthur's personal debt exceeded $90,000. The house they bought was mortgaged to within inches of its value. He'd been building toward this for 2 years, waiting, positioning, patient in the way that only someone who genuinely believed they'd succeed could afford to be. Marsh cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. His testimony filled in the gaps. He'd introduced Arthur to Whitfield. He'd structured the Harlan Group to make the transfers look like legitimate consulting income. He'd been promised 15% of whatever was liquidated from my estate. Whitfield surrendered his medical license voluntarily before the board could convene. His attorney negotiated a settlement with the state. 2 of the 3 families he'd wronged filed civil suits. I joined them. Arthur was charged with financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. His attorney negotiated a plea. He was sentenced to 4 years with the possibility of parole at 26 months. He was also ordered to repay $340,000 to Callaway Home Services. Cassandra was not charged. The prosecutors determined she had signed documents without fully understanding their purpose. I don't know if I believe that. I may never know. But Phoebe needed a mother who wasn't in prison, and I didn't fight it. James was promoted to vice president of operations. He took the job with the kind of quiet seriousness that told me he'd been ready for it for years and had simply been waiting to be asked. We brought on 2 independent board members. We implemented dual authorization on all transfers over $5,000. The company Walter built was still standing. I sat in Walter's chair in his old study for a long time the night the sentencing was handed down. His photograph on the desk, the rose bushes just visible through the window, bare and dormant in the November cold. I kept it, I told him. I kept all of it. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that. I felt like a woman who had been through a long war and come home to find the house still standing, but emptied of something she couldn't name. Phoebe's sitter started bringing her on Sundays again in January. My daughter-in-law dropped her at the end of the driveway and didn't come to the door. Phoebe ran up the walk with her arms out like she always had, like nothing had changed for her. Because for her, not much had. Grammy was still Grammy. The pancakes were still lemon with powdered sugar. I held her longer than usual that first Sunday. She said, "Grammy, you're squishing me." I said, "I know, baby. I know." It was the first time I'd laughed in 4 months. I didn't hear from Arthur for a long time. His attorney handled everything. Then, 7 months after sentencing, a letter arrived. Handwritten, 3 pages. He didn't make excuses. That surprised me. He said he had told himself for 2 years that he was protecting me. For myself, from the work, from the slow diminishment he'd convinced himself was coming. He said Derek, he meant Marsh, had told him that what they were doing was essentially just accelerating what I would have wanted anyway. He said he knew that was wrong. He said he had known for a long time. He said he was sorry, not for getting caught. For what he had become. I read the letter 4 times. Then I put it in the drawer where I keep Walter's letters from when we were young and long distance, and didn't know yet how it would turn out. I wrote back. 1 page. I told him that I forgave him in the way that I hope God forgives all of us, not because the debt is canceled, but because carrying it was too heavy for both of us. I told him that when he came home, there would be coffee and conversation, but no role in the company, not ever. That door was closed. I told him Phoebe asked about him, that I told her daddy was working far away and would be home one day. I told him that his father would have been devastated, and that his father also would have found a way to believe in him again eventually, because that was the kind of man Walter was. I told him I was trying to be that kind of person too. I wasn't there yet. I mailed it on a Tuesday afternoon, and then I drove to the reservoir and sat by the water for a while. The thing nobody tells you about betrayal is that the grief doesn't follow a clean line. You don't mourn it once and move on. It comes back in small waves at ordinary moments. When you're making coffee and you remember teaching him to use the espresso machine, when Phoebe mispronounces a word the way Arthur used to, when you drive past the job site where he got his first real commendation and Walter shook his hand in the parking lot like they were equals. I've learned to let those moments happen and then let them pass. Someone asked me once, after the story had made it into the local paper and then briefly beyond, they asked me if I would do it the same way again. The party, the public exposure, the moment with the envelope over the candle. I've thought about that question for a long time. Here is what I know. Arthur would not have stopped. Marsh would not have stopped. Whitfield would have come to my house on Tuesday and he would have sat in my living room and asked me the names of 5 presidents and the date and whether I could draw a clock face, and he would have written what he was paid to write. By the following Monday, I would have been signing documents I didn't fully understand with a son standing at my shoulder telling me it was all for my own good. I exposed it publicly because the public record is the hardest thing to undo. Because Constance Brewer deserved witnesses. Because the 80 people in that room included clients, colleagues, and friends who needed to know that what had been done to their accounts and their contracts had a name and a source. And because, if I'm honest, I needed to stand up in front of people who had watched me endure things and say, I am still here. You do not get to decide when I am done. That was not ego. That was 40 years of building something and refusing to let it be taken quietly. The retirement party I planned for myself, eventually, was nothing like the one Arthur arranged. It was dinner at my kitchen table. Sandra Hargrove brought dessert. Frances and her husband came. James and his wife. Bonnie flew in from Denver. Harriet from the bank. Carl Deegan, who'd found the smoking gun in the bank records, sent flowers because he had another case that night, but wanted me to know he was thinking of me. And Constance Brewer drove up from Glastonbury. She brought her granddaughter, a young woman named Ivy, who was finishing her law degree and who wants to specialize in elder financial protection law. We sat at the same table for 3 hours and talked about everything except what had almost happened to both of us. At the end of the night, Constance held my hand at the door. "We made it," she said. I squeezed her hand. "We made it," I said. "If you're still here with me, and I hope you are, I want to leave you with the thing that took me the longest to learn. I did not cause what Arthur did. His choices were his choices, made by a grown man who knew the difference between right and wrong. But I am honest enough to look at the full picture. I gave him authority without accountability. I leaned on him so hard after Walter died that I may have made him feel the weight of something he wasn't ready to carry. I let years pass without real conversations, without asking the hard questions, without looking clearly at what was underneath the surface of our relationship. I am not responsible for his crime, but I was not a perfectly present mother, and I need to say that out loud because I think some of you watching this already know exactly what I mean. If you have built something, a company, a savings account, a home, a life, and you are getting older, please hear me. Trust is not the same as vigilance. You can love people completely and still protect yourself from them. Get your documents in order with someone who answers only to you. Have a lawyer who knows your full picture. Pay attention to the people around you who have access to your finances. And if someone comes to you with paperwork at a party, at a dinner, in a moment of celebration, slow down. Walter used to say, "The documents can wait. The people can't." He was right about most things. But on this one, I'd revise it slightly. The right documents, reviewed carefully, are how you protect the people. Thank you for staying with me through this. I know it was long. I know parts of it were hard. If this story gave you something to think about trust, about family, about what it means to protect what you built, I hope you'll stay. There's more I want to share. And wherever you are tonight, I hope someone is watching out for you. If not, watch out for yourself. You've earned that much. I've spent a lot of time in the months since all of this happened trying to understand how it got that far. Not Arthur's choices. I understand those well enough now, even if understanding them doesn't make them hurt less. I mean the conditions, the soil that something like this grows in. What I keep coming back to is this. I gave Arthur authority because I trusted him, and I stopped watching closely because watching closely felt like distrust. I thought those two things were opposites. They're not. You can love someone completely and still verify the numbers. You can hand someone responsibility and still ask questions. The moment I stopped asking questions was the moment I created a space that someone else filled with a different set of answers. That's not a moral failing on my part, but it is a practical one, and I think it's worth naming clearly. There's a version of the story where I walk into that retirement party, sign what Arthur put in front of me, and spend the next 3 years in a slow, quiet diminishment that I never fully understand. Where I lose the company Walter and I built, lose my financial independence, lose the ability to make a single decision about my own life, and spend whatever time I have left wondering why everything feels slightly wrong. That version exists. It almost happened. What stopped it was not luck. What stopped it was Sandra Hargrove, who had known me for 30 years and chose discomfort over silence. It was Frances, who had built a career on reading the fine print other people skip. It was Constance Brewer, a woman I had never met, who had survived her own version of this and was willing to say so out loud in front of strangers at a party where she had no personal stake. What stopped it, ultimately, was the decision to act on what I knew rather than explain it away. I've thought about what would have happened if I'd told myself I must have misheard. If I'd walked out of that storage room with the cake and convinced myself it was some kind of misunderstanding. I thought about how easy that would have been, how much I wanted it to be, a misunderstanding, how much I loved my son and how badly I did not want what I'd heard to be real. But here is what I've come to understand about wisdom, the real kind, not the kind printed on calendars. It is not the absence of doubt. It is the ability to act clearly in the presence of it. I was not certain of everything I'd heard. I did not have proof in my hands when I drove away from that bakery. What I had was enough truth to take the next step, and then the next one, and then the one after that. That is all any of us ever has. Integrity works the same way. Arthur made his choices incrementally, one compromise at a time, one rationalization layered on top of another, until the whole structure was so tall he couldn't see the ground anymore. That's how most wrongs happen. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 small ones, each of which felt, in the moment, survivable. And resilience, the last of the 3 things I believe this story is really about, is not about being unaffected. I was devastated. I am still, in certain quiet moments, devastated. What resilience actually looks like is what James does when he runs a job site on a Tuesday morning, steady and thorough, in a company that almost ceased to exist. It's what Constance Brewer does every time she tells her story to someone who needs to hear it. It's what I do when Phoebe runs up the front walk on a Sunday morning and I open my arms and I am fully present, not calculating, not grieving, not afraid, just there. That's the whole thing, I think. Being present enough to notice, honest enough to act, strong enough to keep going after. Walter always said the house tells you what it needs if you pay attention. He meant it about construction. I think it applies to most things. Pay attention. That's where it starts.